I met a man in rural Ohio who was 79 years old. He had every single tooth he was born with. Not a crown, not an implant, not a partial plate. His own original teeth still in his head, still doing their job. My name is Eli Mercer, and for over a decade I have been traveling through the quiet back roads of this country, sitting in kitchens and on porches, writing down what certain communities still know that the rest of us were slowly steered away from. That afternoon in Wayne County, I sat across from a farmer named Daniel. And the thing that stopped me cold was not his teeth, though they were remarkable. It was the answer he gave when I asked how he kept them. He said he had never purchased a single tube of toothpaste in his life. Not one. For more than 2 centuries, the same 4-ingredient mixture has been made in mason jars in the same communities, passed from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter, generation after generation, total cost under $2 a batch. By the end of this video, I am going to show you the exact recipe his family has been using since before the Civil War. I am going to show you the morning rinse these communities do before a single drop of water or coffee touches their lips. The one that clears out the 10 to 20 billion bacteria that multiplied in your mouth while you slept. And I'm going to share one final technique recorded in a household supply ledger from 1793 that these communities were practicing 200 years before modern research caught up and confirmed it. You do not need to live on a farm. You do not need to give up your dentist. This works in any bathroom in America, starting this weekend, with ingredients from any grocery store, for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. So before you brush your teeth tonight, stay with me to the end, because the tube sitting on your bathroom counter right now is going to look very different in about 15 minutes. Let me take you back to that afternoon in Wayne County. Daniel was sitting on a bench his grandfather had built. He had just finished lunch, bread baked that morning, homemade butter, a slice of apple pie still warm from the oven, and he was chewing on a piece of dried apple slowly, with teeth that had absolutely no business being that strong on a man pushing 80. So I asked him the question I always end up asking. How does a community with no dental insurance, no fluoride in the well water, no orthodontist, no electric toothbrush, no whitening strips, no store-bought mouthwash, how do they keep their teeth? He smiled. Then he walked inside and came back carrying a small glass jar. Inside was a pale yellow paste. It smelled like cloves and something earthy I could not quite place. He set it in my hands and said, "My grandmother made this, my mother made this, my wife makes this, our children make this. Same recipe, over 200 years. That jar cost his family of 7, roughly $1.80 to make, and lasted them nearly 2 months. Now here is what got me when I went home and started digging. The recipe is not hidden. The ingredients are not exotic. Every single one of them has been sitting on grocery store shelves my entire life, but not one dentist I ever visited mentioned them. Not one commercial I ever saw suggested them. Not one tube of paste in the oral care aisle contains the right combination. And I will tell you what that did to my own family, because it is probably the same thing that happened to yours. My mother threw out the baking soda in our bathroom in 1971 because her dentist told her it was outdated. My grandmother, who had all her teeth at 76, switched to commercial paste because her daughter-in-law told her she was being old-fashioned. By the time I was a teenager, the idea of brushing with baking soda sounded as backward as washing your clothes in the creek. That is how completely it was replaced in a single generation, not by force. By a quiet, steady message. That simple meant primitive and store-bought meant scientific. The 4 ingredients are baking soda, fine sea salt, ground turmeric, and clove oil. That is it. 4 things. Every single one of them does something specific that the modern toothpaste industry has either swapped for a cheaper synthetic version or quietly removed because it could not be patented. Let me walk you through what each one actually does. Baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, has been used as a tooth cleaner since ancient Egypt, and the American household kept using it well into the mid-1900s. It is mildly abrasive, just enough to scrub away the soft plaque film that builds up overnight, but it does not scratch your enamel the way harsher abrasives do. I want to stop on that point because someone always pushes back and says baking soda will grind your enamel down like sandpaper. It is one of the most persistent myths in modern dental marketing. There is an actual scale for this, the relative Denton abrasivity scale, developed specifically to measure how rough a toothpaste is on your teeth. Pure baking soda scores about a 7 on that scale. The average commercial whitening toothpaste scores somewhere between 100 and 150. Some of the popular popular name brands score over 200. The standard paste your dentist sends you home with scores around 70. Baking soda is roughly 10 times gentler than what most people are using right now. People think it is harsh because it feels gritty on the tongue, but grit and abrasion are not the same thing. The fine silica in your commercial paste feels perfectly smooth and is far more abrasive on your enamel than baking soda ever was. And more importantly, baking soda neutralizes acid. The bacteria in your mouth produce acid as a byproduct. That acid is what dissolves enamel and starts a cavity. Baking soda raises the pH in your mouth. The acid stops eating at the enamel, and the bacteria, which thrive in an acidic environment, lose the conditions they need to multiply. This is not folk wisdom. The American Dental Association's own website lists sodium bicarbonate as an accepted active ingredient in toothpaste. They acknowledge it works. They simply do not promote it because the companies funding the research and paying for their seal of approval do not profit from it. Fine sea salt works differently. The sodium and trace minerals pull water out of bacterial cells through osmosis. The bacteria shrivel and die. Salt also helps with mild gum inflammation and bleeding, which a significant portion of adults over 50 deal with quietly every day. The Romans knew this. They had some of the strongest teeth of the ancient world. Your dentist has probably told you to rinse with salt water after a procedure because every dentist knows it helps tissue heal, but somehow nobody ever told you to put it in your daily paste. Turmeric is where most people raise an eyebrow because turmeric is bright orange, and the idea of brushing with it sounds unusual. The active compound is curcumin. A study published in the Journal of the International Society of Preventive and Community Dentistry compared a turmeric mouthwash directly against chlorhexidine, the strongest prescription mouthwash a dentist can prescribe. The turmeric performed comparably at reducing plaque and gum inflammation, comparably to the most powerful prescription rinse available for pennies per dose. Curcumin is a natural anti-inflammatory, and inflamed gums are the starting point of nearly every serious dental problem that follows. A daily trace of turmeric working quietly on that inflammation is doing real, measurable work. And then there is clove oil, which surprises people most. The active compound is eugenol. Dentists in the 1800s used it to numb a tooth before an extraction. You can still walk into the dental aisle of any pharmacy today and buy clove oil specifically for tooth pain. It kills bacteria on contact, it calms an aching nerve. The American Dental Association still recognizes eugenol as a legitimate dental compound. It just does not end up in commercial toothpaste because cheaper synthetic flavoring costs less and sells just as well. So you have 4 ingredients. Each one solves a different piece of the same puzzle. The baking soda handles the acid, the salt handles the bacteria, the turmeric handles the inflammation, the clove handles the pain, and adds a second layer against bacteria. Together, they do everything a modern tube of toothpaste does, and a couple of things it does not, for less than $2 a batch. The recipe, written on a piece of brown paper and handed to me that afternoon: 1 teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of fine sea salt, 1 pinch of ground turmeric, and the emphasis was on pinch because too much will stain a porcelain sink. 4 or 5 drops of clove oil. Mix it in a small glass jar with just enough water to make a smooth paste. 10 minutes. Lasts you and your spouse a full month. But here is the question that kept me awake on the drive home. If the recipe is this simple and the ingredients are this cheap, why has nobody told the rest of us? So I started digging, and what I found was not a conspiracy theory, it was a paper trail. In 1955, Procter & Gamble launched Crest. A researcher named Joseph Mueller, working with the company, ran a massive clinical trial. Thousands of mouths, tens of thousands of x-rays, more than 100,000 tubes distributed. The trial showed that stannous fluoride combined with a specific abrasive reduced cavities by roughly 1/3 compared to the control group. 1/3. That was the foundation of the modern toothpaste industry. And from that single result, Procter & Gamble built an empire that today sells billions of dollars of paste every year in America alone. And let me be honest here, because it matters. Fluoride is real. It works. It binds to enamel and makes it more resistant to acid. And that 1/3 reduction was a genuine result that has helped a lot of people. I'm not going to tell you fluoride is a hoax, because it is not. But here is the part nobody mentions. These traditional communities with no fluoride and no patented compounds and no marketing budget were already getting results just as good with baking soda and a pinch of turmeric. And nobody at a toothpaste company was about to build an advertising campaign around that. Because you cannot patent baking soda, you cannot patent salt, you cannot trademark a spice that has grown in India for 4,000 years. You cannot put a label on clove oil and sell it for $6 a tube with a clear conscience. There is simply no money in a recipe you can mix in a mason jar. And so for 3 generations, that recipe got quietly labeled as old-fashioned and pushed to the back of the shelf. Not by a conspiracy in a back room, by something simpler and harder to fight. By the plain fact that there was a fortune to be made selling the new thing, and nothing at all to be made reminding you of the old one. In 2012, a group of dental students from the University at Buffalo School of Dental Medicine went into a traditional rural community in western New York to do outreach work. They expected to find serious decay. No fluoride in the well water, no commercial toothpaste, no dental visits. By everything modern dentistry teaches, those children should have had mouths full of cavities. They examined roughly 120 children that day. What they found was the opposite of what they were trained to expect. The large majority of those children, with no fluoride, no commercial paste, no dental visits, no sealants, no insurance, had healthy teeth. Sound, clean, cavity-free teeth in children who had never once sat in a dentist's chair. The students focused their report on the small number of children who did have cavities and wrote about the need for hygiene education and access to care. That is a reasonable thing to write. But the real story was standing on the other side of the room. The real story was the overwhelming majority of those children whose families had been mixing the same baking soda, salt, and clove paste for 2 centuries, and who had healthy mouths to show for it without a single dollar of modern dentistry ever being spent. Nobody wrote the paper about the healthy ones. The cavities made the report. The healthy mouths walked back out the door and went home the way they had for 200 years. Now, if you already own a house and you have been listening to me talk about kitchens and mason jars and thinking this only applies to people who live on a farm with a wood stove, stay with me. You do not need to grind your own wheat. You do not need to churn your own butter. You do not need to give up your dentist. Please keep seeing your dentist. What I am about to share works in any bathroom in America, in any house, in any apartment, at any age, starting tomorrow morning with one ingredient you probably already have in your kitchen. It is the morning rinse. An old Pennsylvania Dutch phrase for it translates roughly as die Morgenspülung, the morning clearing, and it is one of the most important habits in 200 years of this dental tradition. Here is what happens while you sleep. Your salivary glands, which produce the saliva that protects your teeth all day, slow down dramatically at night. Saliva is your body's built-in defense system. It washes away food particles, neutralizes acid, and carries enzymes that keep bacteria in check. Think of it as a river running over your teeth all day long, constantly carrying the bad things away. When you sleep, that river slows to a trickle for 8 straight hours. Meanwhile, the bacteria in your mouth do not sleep. They feed, they reproduce, they produce acid, they build a soft film across your teeth that gets thicker hour by hour through the night. By the time your alarm goes off, the bacterial load in your mouth has multiplied into the billions. Somewhere between 10 and 20 billion organisms sitting on your teeth and gums, all of them having spent the night producing the acid that eats your enamel. And what does the average American do first thing in the morning? He drinks a glass of water or coffee or orange juice and washes all of those bacteria, along with every bit of acid and waste they produced overnight, straight down into his stomach. He swallows the whole colony. These traditional communities never do this. Not once. Not ever. The morning rinse is simple. Before you eat anything, before you drink anything, before your lips touch a single drop of water, mix a 1/4 teaspoon of fine sea salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda into a small glass of warm water. Swish for 60 seconds. Push it between your teeth, pull it through every gap, gargle the last bit at the back, then spit it all out. That 60-second rinse does 3 things simultaneously. The salt works on the bacteria through osmotic pressure, pulling the water out of their cells. The baking soda neutralizes the acid they produced overnight, raising the pH back to safe, and the swishing physically dislodges the soft film that formed on your teeth over 8 hours. You have cleared out the overnight colony before it ever went down your throat, for less than a penny. Then, and only then, do you brush with the paste. The combination of the morning rinse and the paste is the full daily habit. The two together are what makes the difference. There is one detail about the morning rinse worth knowing. When older women in these communities were asked why they insist on it, they would often say their own grandmothers told them that the night air in the mouth was poison. Night air, poison. They did not have words for bacteria or biofilm or pH balance, but they understood, by watching generation after generation, exactly what was happening. The mouth goes bad overnight, and you clear it out before you swallow it. The science caught up to the grandmothers much later. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, what about fluoride? What about all those decades of dentists telling me it is the only thing standing between me and dentures? Let me address that directly and honestly, because I am not here to sell you a fairy tale. Fluoride works by binding to enamel and making it more resistant to acid. That is true, it is well documented, and it is a real benefit. The traditional approach works on a different part of the same problem. Instead of armoring the enamel against the acid, it reduces the bacteria producing the acid in the first place. These are not enemies. They are two tools aimed at the same target from different angles. There is no reason on earth you cannot use both. You can do the salt and baking soda rinse in the morning, brush with the homemade paste, and still use a fluoride toothpaste at night if your dentist recommends it, especially if you are prone to cavities. This is not about throwing away modern dentistry. It is about adding back something simple and cheap and effective that got quietly pushed aside. If you have real dental problems, see your dentist. Nothing in a mason jar replaces a professional looking in your mouth once a year. What it can do is handle the day-to-day for about $24 a year instead of a few hundred. Before I give you the last and oldest piece of this, the one recorded in a 1793 household ledger, everything I have gathered from these communities over the years is pulled together in one place in the description below, under the Eli Mercer Secrets Home System. Now stay right here, because what comes next is the part I built this entire video around. There is one more piece to this puzzle, and this is the one I have never seen mentioned in any modern health article or book. It was recorded in a Pennsylvania Dutch household supply ledger from 1793. The ledger belonged to a Lancaster County farmer named Hans Stoltzfus. The original is in a private collection. I was shown a photograph of the page during one of my visits to Pennsylvania. The entry is dated the 3rd week of October, 1793. It is a list of winter household supplies, mostly what you would expect: flour, salt, pork, dried beans, candle wax, leather oil. The ordinary things a family lays in before the cold comes, but near the bottom there is a notation that translates roughly to bark of the prickly ash, 2 pounds for the teeth and the gum, 2 pounds for the teeth and the gum. A man in 1793 planning his winter the same way he planned his flour and his candle wax set aside 2 pounds of tree bark specifically for his family's mouths. The prickly ash, Xanthoxylum americanum, is a small tree that grows wild across the eastern United States. The native tribes of the Northeast called it the toothache tree and had been using it for generations before any European settler arrived. The Pennsylvania Dutch learned about it from their Lenape neighbors in the 1700s, and it became a regular fixture in traditional households for nearly a century. They would chew the small twigs or boil the bark into a strong tea and rinse with it about once a week. The bark contains compounds called alkylamides, the same family found in Szechuan peppercorns, the ones that make your tongue tingle and go slightly numb. Those compounds appear to increase saliva production. And remember what I told you about saliva being your body's natural defense system, the river that runs over your teeth all day long. A rinse that boosts that flow supports the mouth's own ability to wash away acid and help rebuild the surface of the enamel. These communities were deliberately doing that in 1793, 2 pounds at a time, listed between the beans and the candle wax. Modern dentistry only began studying salivary remineralization seriously in the late 20th century. These people were 200 years ahead of that research, and they did not even think of it as remarkable. It was just on the supply list. Now, you probably do not have a prickly ash tree in your backyard. Most of us do not, and I am not going to send you into the woods stripping bark off trees you cannot identify. But here is what I learned from an herbalist named Sarah in Holmes County. For households without the tree, there is a modern substitute that works on the same underlying problem in a different way, and it costs almost nothing. The substitute is xylitol, a natural sugar substitute originally derived from birch bark, available in any health food store or online. 5 grams of xylitol crystals dissolved in warm water, swished for 2 minutes about once a week. Xylitol works by a clever trick of biology. It tastes sweet to the bacteria in your mouth, so they absorb it expecting food, but they cannot metabolize it, and their numbers fall over time. This one is genuinely well studied. In Finland, where xylitol gum was given to school children beginning in the 1970s, researchers tracked those children for years and documented real, measurable reductions in childhood cavities, from a sugar substitute that costs about $12 a pound and lasts a full year. One note of caution, and it is a real one: xylitol is safe for people, but it is genuinely poisonous to dogs, even in very small amounts. If you have a dog in the house, keep the jar sealed and stored up high where the dog cannot reach it. So now you have the full protocol. The 4-ingredient paste made in 10 minutes for under $2. The morning rinse of sea salt and baking soda, 60 seconds before anything touches your lips. And the weekly xylitol rinse, 2 minutes once a week. That is the complete system, 200 years old. Total annual cost with quality ingredients around $24. Total daily time under 5 minutes. Let me tell you the moment I knew this was real. On my third visit to Daniel's farm, about 3 years after we first met, we were sitting in his kitchen drinking coffee. His youngest grandson came running in, maybe 4 years old, with a piece of apple in his hand. Daniel pulled the boy onto his lap and asked to see his teeth. The boy opened wide, white, straight, everyone in place. Daniel looked at me and said, "My grandfather showed me his teeth when I was this boy's age. My grandfather was 81. He still had every one of them. The boy will see his great-grandchildren the same way. This is what we keep. This is what we pass." Let me tell you about one more man, because his story is the one that finally convinced my own father to try this. Wendell Yoder was born in 1928 in a small settlement outside Berlin, Ohio, and he passed away in the summer of 2021 at 93. When the funeral director prepared his body, he noticed something and mentioned it to the family. Wendell had every one of his original teeth, 93 years of chewing tough farm bread and dried meat and apples straight from the tree, and his mouth at the end looked, according to the man who prepared him, like the mouth of a much younger man. His daughter Mary told me by letter that her father had brushed twice a day, every single day, with baking soda and a pinch of salt mixed in a small ceramic cup that sat on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. He used a soft brush, and he swished with apple cider vinegar, diluted in well water every Sunday morning before services. That was the whole regimen. No floss, no mouthwash, no electric anything. In these rural Ohio and Pennsylvania communities, Wendell's story is not unusual. The dentists who serve these areas will tell you they see the pattern again and again. The older the patient, the cleaner the mouth, especially in the generation that never once touched commercial toothpaste. And the candid ones will also tell you it is not only the paste, it is the paste plus a diet with very little processed sugar, plus the absence of constant snacking and sweet drinks throughout the day. You and I cannot fully copy the diet, not unless we are ready to give up the sweetened coffee and the packaged snacks and the salad dressings with more sugar in them than a candy bar. But we can copy the paste. It costs almost nothing. It takes 30 seconds, and it does real, measurable good. Last October, I sat on the porch of a farmhouse in Walnut Creek, Ohio, with a woman named Sarah Miller, 78 years old, runs a small bakery out of her kitchen. The sun was going down behind the silo, and the air smelled like wood smoke and the cinnamon bread she had pulled from the oven an hour earlier. I asked her what her mother had taught her about her teeth. She laughed and said her mother had told her the same thing her mother had told her, which was that the mouth is the door to the body, and if you keep the door clean, the house stays well. She walked me to her sink and showed me a little glass jar of baking soda with a tiny wooden spoon inside it that had been sitting in that same spot since 1962. Refilled 1,000 times, never moved. That jar, she said, had outlasted 3 presidents she did not vote for, and every fancy toothpaste her grandchildren had ever given her as a gift. She said it the way you would talk about an old friend, with a kind of quiet fondness, because to her that jar was not a cleaning product. It was a thread running back through her mother and her grandmother and every woman in that line who had kept her teeth and passed the habit down. Then she smiled, and every tooth in her mouth was her own. That is what I want for you. That is what I want for your children. You did not lose your teeth because you were careless. You did not pay those dental bills because you were unlucky. You paid them, in part, because nobody ever told you there was a simpler, cheaper habit you could add alongside everything else. Now you know. You are not too late. It does not matter if you are 55 or 65 or 75 or how many fillings you already have. Starting this weekend with $2 of ingredients and 10 minutes in your kitchen, you can begin doing what these families have done for 2 centuries. The recipe, one final time: 1 teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of fine sea salt, 1 pinch of ground turmeric, 4 or 5 drops of clove oil, mixed with just enough water to form a smooth paste. stored in a small glass jar. The morning rinse, a quarter teaspoon each of sea salt and baking soda in a small glass of warm water, swished for 60 seconds every morning before anything else touches your lips. The weekly xylitol rinse, 5 grams dissolved in warm water, swished for 2 minutes once a week. Keep seeing your dentist. Use this alongside, not instead. If you are the kind of person who believes that simple, cheap knowledge that built this country has been quietly pushed aside to protect somebody's quarterly earnings, then you already know what to do next. Try the paste this weekend. Give it 30 days and watch what happens to your gums and your breath. Then come back and tell me one thing in the comments. Did you or your parents or your grandparents ever brush with baking soda before the modern toothpaste industry quietly talked your family out of it? I read every comment, and every time one of you shares that memory, 20 more people realize they had the same one and forgot it. If this gave you something worth keeping, subscribe and stay with us at Eli Mercer Secrets, because there is a whole community here recovering what our grandparents knew. The next one is about a single window technique these communities have used for 2 centuries to cut their winter heating costs nearly in half for under $5 in materials. Until then, mix the paste, do the rinse, and pass it on to your children and your grandchildren. Because what we keep, like Daniel said in that kitchen in Wayne County, is what we pass. And what we pass is what survives.